welcome back to another episode on People Ops Playbook. I'm Bara, your host. This podcast is for all HR professionals who are looking for practical tools, frameworks, and examples to help you create great workplace. Today's episode is about HR project planning. We're almost at the end of the year, looking for ways to make next year the most effective through the projects. So talking about projects, how do we prioritize? How do we align them with the business goals? How do we measure them effectively? All these things we're going to talk about in this episode. So joining us today, we have Maude Royer. She's a founder of Hoom Consulting, an HR consulting firm in Montreal. Maude has a proven track record of building and scaling HR teams in fast-growing organizations. She's working with SMBs, startups in growth phase, helping them with everything, outsourcing HR functions to supporting them with the recruitment in the growth phase. So I'm super excited to have her. Maude, thank you so much for joining this call with me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I mean, you're the best since you work with so many organizations, constantly working on the projects. You are a great person to talk about strategic planning on this episode. I'm super excited to have you. To kickstart things,
yes.
When somebody is new to the organization, or someone who got promoted, or someone who wants to create just effective projects, starting at the assessment phase, especially when you're working with the companies, you have limited time to understand its culture, challenges, people. I'm curious, what are those first steps you take to quickly assess the environment? And also, what kind of data or signals do you look for to get the whole picture?
Well, the good thing at Hoom is that because we work with smaller organizations, we often have direct access to the execs, the C-level, right? So our first calls with the leadership will often give us a lot of information on their vision and what they see as the culture of their organization. So that's one thing. But as an HR, you're also going to want to, or a consultant, or even internally, you're going to want to have access to as many documents as you can in terms of like the values and the policies, employee manuals, and so on. If you can have access to engagement surveys, that's a big plus, obviously, like data from the past and seeing the fluctuation in that data. If not, sometimes when we as consultants come in, we will put together a quick survey just to get the pulse, to understand the culture better. We are in a world where we all work remote, but we like to visit people, in their office as much as possible if they have one. And then we would want to meet with as many employees as we have time to meet with and we can meet with. So we'll ask for a list of employees that we can meet with and prepare a list of questions and then a report on the interview questions that we ask those people. Other than that, data such as your turnover data can tell you a little bit about the culture. DEI will tell you a lot as well, I guess, right? Gender data, and then you're going to look at all of this company-wide, but also department per department, as there might be different cultures or subcultures within the organization depending on the size.
When you talk about survey, are you going to put up the survey for the entire organization, or is it specifically to the C-level?
So the surveys that we're talking right now is like, you just got into the organization. You're trying to understand the culture. You're trying to understand how employees are feeling. It would be like an overall survey. Also understand that because I'm working with SMBs, or, our biggest clients have like 300 employees, I'm going to say. It's easier. It's going to be a quick survey, 10 to 12 questions. We're going to try to keep that as simple as possible. And it's going to be organization-wide because your C-levels are going to tell you one thing. And to be honest, they might think that they know everything, but they might be surprised by whatever comes out of that little survey.
I'm curious if you choose certain employees from different levels, or do you go about interviewing everyone based on the size, if it's 40 or 30 people?
You're going to want to have a sample as much as possible from different levels. You can't only rely to what your management levels are saying. You want to like hear from individual contributors as well, but also department wise. So you're just really going to try to have a sample that is as complete as possible. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. When you meet with these employees or in the survey, what are those like top 3 to 5 questions that yield most valuable insights for you?
Well, in conversations or interviews, one of the most simple question, but I will say a lot, especially if you're talking to many people, is how would you describe the culture here? I know it sounds like really simple, but it will often tell you a lot about their vision or their perception of the work environment, communication style, and like the overall culture. And it will also tell you if most of what you're receiving is negative or positive, which is going to be a big indicator as well, right? If when you're asking people to describe the culture, everything you receive is negative comments, then there's definitely an issue. But if it's all positive, then that's a good sign. Other than that, I like to talk about leadership and management as well. So do you feel supported by your manager or the leadership team is another question that I would ask, which would tell us a lot, because I'm not going to teach any HR anything here by saying that, if you don't get along with your manager, if you don't like the management style, it's probably one of the main reasons why you end up leaving an organization. So that's one of the things that we would look at. I'd like to have employees' perception on what they feel is the biggest challenge that the organization is facing. The different perception at different levels or different departments is quite interesting, and that tells us a lot. And then sometimes I'll go more granular, and ask them the improvements that they would like to see in different processes or so on.
Yeah, those are some great questions. On those lines of collecting data, another question that I have is, how do you ensure you're gathering right data from right resources, especially when you're dealing with different stakeholders' perspectives and potential biases?
I multiply sources. So sometimes it's difficult to understand, but you can't just take whatever the execs are saying like for granted. So we want to look at all kinds of different sources, and then we come back with our findings. I'm guessing you're going to ask me the different sources, so I'm just going to go right into it. You have your different stakeholders. You have your engagement surveys, if you're lucky enough that there are engagement surveys. You have your KPIs, your data. So if you have HRIS in place, you're going to be able to see, the turnovers, all of that. Interviews, focus groups. I like focus groups. When I say multiply sources, you also get different types of information when people are within a group, like in a focus group, than individual interviews. And also in external benchmarks. I like to look at what I'm seeing within this organization versus what the external benchmarks or the industry they're in is saying. So I find that interesting as well.
I'd like to know if you can share an example of how you turned raw data into an actionable recommendation for a client. An example.
Yeah, sure. It's hard to choose. Let me think. Okay. So we had this client that we worked with who came to us because we work with different manners with clients. Sometimes it's a general HR, and then sometimes they come to you because they have an issue. And this client came to us because they were experiencing a high turnover, and they were noticing also that over time, teams really started working in silos and not communicating with each other. So we looked into the raw data. In their case, we were very lucky. They had over 3 years of engagement surveys coming from, I think it was Bamboo HR that they had. So we looked at that over the last 3 years, per department and per gender, per age groups, per location, per everything. Like really, like it takes quite a long time. You know what? Maybe nowadays, because that was like a few years back, maybe nowadays you could take that Excel mega sheet and then put in an AI and ask him to give you, chat GPT to give you the main points. But
Yeah.
I think I would still do it almost by hand. That's me. But yeah. And we were able to pinpoint the main areas for them that were why the employees were feeling disengaged. One was their relationship with their managers and the leadership type that was within the organization, and the other one was actually career development and their growth opportunities within the organization. So what we did is a series of initiatives. One was, you're not going to be surprised, manager training and leadership training. That was one of the main ones. The other one is, again, it's going to be aligned with what I just said. We developed a program for career paths so that employees would actually be able to visualize what the company already knew was, the truth, which there was path and growth opportunities, but they couldn't see it. They just didn't know it was there. They couldn't see it. So with that program, we were able to show the different paths, whether it was as an individual contributor or as a manager, and how to navigate these paths. We also reviewed the performance program, the review process with them, so that it would be clearer in terms of expectations within these paths as well. So the goal, I guess, was really for us to improve that retention, but not necessarily by sitting down with employees and being like, why is it that you're not staying? Like, by really feeling like using that raw data and being like, okay, what are the things that are making our employees unhappy? And going to that sources of that raw data that you were talking about.
Just curious, what was the timeline like to build the whole programs?
Oh, yeah. That's interesting because the clients are always like, okay, I need a solution tomorrow morning. The reality is, the bigger the organization, I think in that case, it was maybe 150 employees. Whatever the situation, you need to take your time to actually make sure that you find the right answers and then the right solutions to your answers. But I feel as though one of the good things is you can always do things in stages, and also the simple act of telling people that you are working on this and looking at finding solution already has an impact. So even though in that case, I think the timeline to do I want to say like 5 to 6 months, we put everything in place, but we started very early to communicate our intentions and working with the business so that it would communicate what was going on with the team. And just that already has an impact, honestly.
That's awesome. So you went with small, releasing project by project, so people know things are happening already, and then excited for the next one. That's amazing.
Exactly. And communicating like this, we know this is going on. We've, engaged these people to help us figure out what's going on and then find answers. And then as you go, you just communicate that. Yeah.
Great. As we talk about that, I think it's great you mentioned about how you prioritized certain projects and got the wins and got the trust of the employees and then went ahead and launched. I think that's amazing. And talking about that prioritization itself, how do you go about prioritizing your projects? What's like your approach? How do you know which one is creating the highest impact in a shorter amount of time? Your quick wins.
Yeah. Well, okay, so it's a balancing act that I think all people ops or HR professional will recognize. It's a balancing act between what the business says that they need to see happening because of their goals, what the employees see as a priority for them, and what you as an HR professional see on the ground happening, and also the legal ramification of the things that are not being done. So it's like a balancing act of like these three things. And we try to make sure that whatever priorities we decide, we make as many people as happy as possible. But there's always, you kind of have to make peace with the fact that there's always going to be people who are not going to happy with what you prioritize, right?
Yeah.
There's always going to be someone who's going to be, I wish they'd done that and not like waited for it. One of the things that helps us at Hoom anyway is that we've developed this HR audit tool, which is, it's our tool. We built it. It has now about 200 questions, and to be honest, we always add questions. It keeps on growing. It has a mind of its own almost. That really kind of like goes through everything in HR and allows us to evaluate the business on these 200 point factors, if you want, helping us to identify where they are lacking the most. And then once you see where they are lacking the most, it's also okay, but let's say, for example, they are really poor in terms of recruitment or talent acquisition. Yeah, but are they looking to hire? Because if they're not, this is not going to be my priority, right?
Right.
These are things like, but having this big picture from our HR audit tool is really something that, helps us. So that, and also understanding that when you're trying to establish priorities in HR, what I found is that everything is linked in HR. So, for example, if my client says, my priority is to have a performance management program, okay, then I would ask them, let's say I don't know them very well, do you have an HRIS in place? Because personally, if I'm going to build you a performance management program, I'd rather it's in a system. And if it's going to be in a system, I'd rather it's within the same system that all your other HR functions are going to be in. That's, easier. So do you have an HRIS? That's one thing. Then it's, what am I going to evaluate people on in this performance management program? Do you have values? Do you have organizational values? Because that could be important in evaluating, like as an evaluation criteria. If the answers to both of these things are no, then I would be like, okay, maybe we need to wait on the performance management program and think about these steps before. Now, if it's very urgent that we evaluate employees now, obviously there's a way we can do it, for this year in a quicker way, but everything is linked in HR. So you can't be like, I need to do this without thinking, was this or that done before? This is really what I'm realizing. It's like, I've taken to call it an HR ecosystem because that's what it is. It is an HR ecosystem. And one thing doesn't work well, it impacts everything. So if you're going to do one project, you have to think about the impact on other sub-function in HR for each of these projects.
Yeah, that's a great example. So when you mentioned about HR audit tool, how does it play a role in the assessments phase? When you gather the raw data, do you do the whole HR audit tool and mark certain things, rank them?
So most of the questions will be answered by either like yes, they have it, or it's present, or it's partially there, or this is not existed at all. And if it's yes, we usually answer like, it's like, is it good or is it bad? Because sometimes they have something and it's like, oof, that's not good at all. For example, they have an employee manual. Okay, they have one, but it needs to be reviewed entirely.
So when we talk about the audit tool, I would love for you to share a little bit more on that for audience who doesn't know about the audit tool, and what are the elements would that be?
Yeah. Well, think about, as I said, don't try to think about your HR function as like a big thing. To me, HR is a puzzle. As I said, it's an ecosystem separated in parts, right? That's the first thing you want to do. I think I mentioned to you, I'm not comfortable giving you my tool that we've been building for years. But that being said, there are online tools that you'll find. Be honest, AI could probably help you with that as well if you know how to use AI properly. But you want to find a list that's going to have questions and check. It's a checklist, right? In each of these areas in HR. And then maybe you find one that is very simple and you build on it. Good examples are AI HR, which is a good website in terms of HR, as one that is extremely simple. Notion, for those of you guys who know Notion, also as a a nice checklist that I feel is very simple to kind of like start from, and then you adapt these based on the reality of your industry, of the location as well, because the needs in terms of like, I'm in Montreal, you're in Toronto, where it's not the same needs. It's going to be a different audit, HR audit. So you also want to adapt it. I'd like to tell you that there is a one-size-fit-all tool out there in terms of an HR audit. There isn't. There's always going to be work to do to build it for your own needs. But there are tools that will allow you to like start from somewhere.
That's awesome. So for everyone, I'll be pointing out all those two links in the description, and also most likely on the screen. So in terms of prioritization, this is how I see. There's like one circle, which is employee, one circle, which is HR, one circle, which is company. And and there are 4 or 5 topics, all the ones which like come together in the middle, which satisfies everyone, is like one prioritization that we can do, one way of doing it. Second way is compliance and things like that on HR side, which we know, okay, they could get sued any moment if they don't work on this, is another one. And in order to get to those projects itself, you use that HR audit tool effectively to kind of identify, okay, what even the projects that I need to build here? Let's see, assess everything, identify 4 or 5 things, and then you go about prioritizing based on these 2 factors. Got it. Awesome.
You see, you got it.
Okay. So we talked about a little bit about how do we prioritize different areas. Now, once you know what are the areas to be prioritizing, how do you go about structuring and developing projects to address them? Specifically, how do you also define the KPIs, metrics to measure the progress and ensure the alignment with the business objectives?
Well, the first thing is, and that's really what made me fall in love with HR projects and why I do what I do, is the first time I had to build a HR strategic planning as a first resource, like a first HR resource in a startup, as an employee back then, fell in love with it. And then I realized how important it is to have a strategic plan. And even as consultants, we often, build a strategic plan for like 3 years for our clients in terms of HR. So you want to look at your strategic plan, and then you separate it in projects. I like to use tools like Trello or Monday, which are very simple project management tools, right? And I think there are free versions for each of these tools. So you can use that if you're not part of an organization that already has project management tools, which a lot of organizations already do. But if not, that's an option. And then for me, it's important to understand that projects are, so strategic planning divided into projects divided into tasks, and then deliverables, right? I know it sounds simple, but sometimes it's important to remind ourselves that it's actually that simple. And once that's done, it's about assigning those tasks and those deliverables to different members of your team. We at Hoom like to work in a very collaborative manner within our team, but also with our clients. And I think that is also applicable if you work as an HR in an organization, because what you want to do is give some of those deliverables or those tasks or accountability to the end users, to the person who is the client in our case, because you want to make sure that they're included as early as possible. So I'm just adding this. I think it's important. Like it's good. You have tasks, you have deliverables, but who are these tasks going to is also something important to think about.
Yeah. So especially when we talk about clients, delegating the task to them, are they going to be the HR within the organization? Are they going to be the senior leaders or CEO?
Well, most of our clients are too small. They don't have HR. So it's going to be, people within the organizations. Sometimes it's the CEO when it's a very small organization. The reason why is because as consultants, if you're external, whatever you're building, initiative, projects, putting in place, the goal is for them to be independent at the end and to know how to operate it, to maintain it. So it's easier if they're part of it from the beginning, right? Obviously, I'm not going to make them redact a very long document or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. They're not going to do my job, but it's important to kind of like have them part of it. Sometimes they actually like to have a member of their team, like part of it. Like, for example, if we know there's going to be a lot of recruitment coming. I'm sorry, my dog is showing. We have an additional person on the podcast. If, for example, one of the big projects is to develop the recruitment strategy or the recruitment program and the onboarding program, and we know that in the next year, the sales team is going to double in size because we're ready to go to market, and the sales director or VP of sales will likely be part of that project and will likely, be assigned a few tasks, whether it's reviewing something or, giving us insights on it. It's important. So it is, whether you're a consultant or whether you're an employee as an HR, having these people part of the projects and being assigned or responsible for a few things, in my opinion, is important. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great example in onboarding. Like for department heads, maybe they're working on training materials for the onboarding process, could be one thing. And it's also, I think, great because they're involved in the process and we're effectively building that project for them. At the same time, we're also training them on how to do it after you're done with the project and they know from end to end.
It's easier. There's less training and it's just easier for them to take it on after.
Yeah. Great. So one of the questions that I have is regarding the strategic plan you mentioned. What are those key components to it and how do you go about building one?
Yeah, well, the key components are going to be your HR sub-functions, if you like the same ones that you would have in your HR audits, essentially. Personally, in terms of building it, when I was leading HR teams internally within an organization, what I would do is I would plan a 2 to 3 days workshop, like of workshops or of exercises that we would do together with the goal of exiting those 2 to 3 days with clear priorities and tangible actions that we were going to take to reach our goals, aka projects or HR initiatives. I usually would actually ask the team to prepare for these by sending them material in advance. It could be as simple as, a SWOT analysis of your People Ops team, because that's important for sure, but also then sending them all the, engagement survey data that you have or all the key metrics that you have, if you are lucky enough that you have HR metrics in place in your HRIS and so on, and asking the team to look into it and really take the time to pinpoint what they feel are the main pain points and the key areas so that you can discuss it together. One thing that I find important is also including, if you have a team, including everyone. Just because there's a coordinator versus a senior HR BP, everyone should be doing this exercise because we want everyone's opinion. It doesn't really matter if you've been with the organization for 10 years or 2 years. Your dynamic between your HR team is important. And then you meet for 2 to 3 days. And when I see you meet, there are ways to do it remotely as well for remote teams. Like there are tools like Miro, for example, where you can whiteboard, and I think even now the Google Suite has that as well. You'll do subgroups and so on, but little workshops. And at the end, what you want to do is really have your priorities and then start building your HR plan. For me, an HR strategic plan is for 3 years normally, but then every year you would review your plan in place and then keep building on it. Yeah.
Got it. So when you mentioned about the workshop, who all are majorly the people in the workshop?
Your HR team. So for me, that's like, it's really, I like to build it with my People Ops But because we have data coming from different sources, then, it makes sense that we have kind of like the opinion of the employees and so on. But the same way your finance team is going to build their strategic plan, as an HR team, you'll do the same thing. Yeah.
Would love to talk about how do you measure certain aspects of people projects which are intangible aspects like culture, morale.
Well, in my experience, you can try to find data within engagement surveys or whatever it is, but nothing will beat human to human conversations, because it's intangible. So I, there's nothing like having those conversations and just digging deeper and asking follow-up questions. And I guess the good thing as consultant is, we were talking about confidentiality earlier and so on. This is how we get the intangible. It's because they know they can talk to us. And I would like to believe that even as, in a people ops team or an HR team within an organization, you can build relationships with employees where they trust you enough to tell you these things. Honestly, for me, the intangible aspects, they can't be measured in numbers or in data. They're through conversations.
Yeah, feelings, emotions.
Feelings, exactly. And so talking with people and making sure that they feel comfortable talking to you, and recognizing those keywords and those key informations that keep coming back and so on, that's important.
Yeah, so true. And one thing that I found personally helpful is when the culture was super bad to culture, you've improved it super awesome. I think the ENPS score from that moment to now, are they being promoters? Are they being trackers?
Yes.
I think that one thing has been a little helpful in terms of metrics. Yeah.
The ENPS score is one of the only metrics that I can be like, okay, well, this is proving to us that this is where we do have an impact on that's it, or any engagement surveys, but like that's good information for sure.
Another question I have regarding, as we talk about the culture, morale, intangible aspects to measure, what are your go-to survey questions that consistently provide a deeper understanding of organization culture, employee morale? Are there any specific areas, themes that you always want to make sure to cover?
Well, as you can imagine, there are many questions you can ask, right? And a lot of survey tools will come with questions that are already pre-made. But I think it's important to understand that some questions will be good for some organizations, but also not good for other organizations. So for me, that's also something that's important to keep in mind. In terms of how or the frequency of those questions, before I tell you the questions that I like tools that will allow you to have more frequent small surveys rather than one big survey a year. That's my preference, because then you not only see how people are feeling or engaged they are, but also you can see through time, how things are going. So that for me is my preference. Then in terms of questions, I always try to make sure that there are questions that will tell us about leadership and management. So for example, do you feel like you're receiving good feedback from your leader, or constructive feedback? Or is your leadership team, does the leadership team have the ability to lead, like get us to our goals, or really kind of like focusing on that aspect. Recognition, like do you feel like you're being recognized enough in your work? That's another one for me that is important. Career development, do you see any future or potential growth for yourself in the organization? Because then, if the answer is then obviously high turnover is gonna happen very soon for you. I like to ask about alignment. So sometimes I think it's interesting to ask them, how aligned do you feel with your organization's goals or mission? because that also is a big indicator of if employees will stay, if they feel like they're aligned with your mission or the goals that you have as an organization. And then work-life balance is very important as well. So, do you feel like we take your work-life balance or your well-being, that we care or that we do enough for it? That would be something that I would ask as well.
That's awesome. All these questions I will be adding in the description too as a link. And if you have any more survey questions online that you found super helpful, I will link them down below.
Perfect.
So we talked about the assessment. We talked how do we assess the whole and collect the data. Then we talked about how do we prioritize, how do we identify those high priority areas. Then we talked about how do we go about building that strategic plan and projects, and we talked about how do we measure them, especially intangible things like culture and morale. And then now my question is about the systems. I guess you mentioned a little bit about Trello, Monday.com, and some people use Excel sheet to
just a Gantt, a project, a good old Gantt chart in an Excel sheet if you want is going to be enough. The goal is to organize yourself, honestly.
I'm curious on those lines of projects, frameworks and tools. Is there anything else that you want to share with HR professionals that will be really helpful in capturing everything perfectly and also able to measure it?
Listen, the truth is if you're talking about measuring your impact and the metrics, I'm going to say something that not all HR professionals will agree with, but KPIs are great because it feels like we're talking to the business, but when can you actually be sure that you are measuring the impact of the initiatives that you've put in place? For example, turnover has gone down. Okay, great. That's a great KPI. Turnover has gone down. Why? Is it because of the salary increases? Is it because of the new recognition program you've put in place? Is it because you've trained your managers to be better leaders? Or honestly, is it because the economy is not good and people don't want to risk changing jobs? So how can you be 100% sure as an HR professional that you are which one of the initiatives is the reasons behind that lower turnover? I feel as though it's something that is always going to be a reality in terms of being an HR people ops, where we're always going to have this struggle in terms of measuring our success and showing it to the business. But overall, I think over time, if all the metrics are getting a little bit better, then you're showing it. It's just like don't try, in my opinion, to link a specific initiative to a specific metric. There's too many factors. We're dealing with humans, not with numbers.
Yeah, just like how you said, everything is so connected. It's just hard to exactly say which one is driving what.
And even if you ask employees, like, why is it that you decided to stay and you're not leaving us? They wouldn't be able to tell you it's that specific thing. It's a series of things, because this is not finance. It's more complex. We're dealing with feelings. We're dealing with humans. And so we're attacking our issues or our priorities in HR through different angles, hoping that it will have the impact that we want, which is overall employee engagement and productivity, and then we reach our goals.
Yeah, that makes sense. So on those lines of metrics, you have built the projects, you worked on them, initiatives, and you want to, it's almost end of the year, you want to show the results to the client. So how do you go about showing that this is where you were and this is where you reached, and this is like the impact that has happened? So how do you go about doing that?
Okay, so it's one thing to say that I don't believe that we can link specific initiatives to specific metrics. But it's another thing, though, to be conscious of these are the metrics that at the beginning of the period were low and were really annoying for the client or, the execs. They were looking at the retention and they were annoyed by it. Or they were looking at, let's use another example. They were looking at recruitment and time to fill, and they felt that low, like it didn't make sense, It's too long. It's taking us way too long to recruit good employees. Then you want to make sure that these metrics that they were saying were the issues are the metrics that then you're using to show it, because often these C-levels or the execs or the client, they are business people, right? Yeah. So even if us know that we will attack these metrics and these issues through different angles, when you're speaking with the business, and I think we all know that as people ops and as HR, you want to get back to the numbers. Yep. It's just. Yeah.
Next question I have is about adapting to the changes. Yes. And being experimental. Yes. Especially startups are super fast-paced and things are changing very fast, more than ever before with the AI introduction. So and at the same time, every organization is unique, and sometimes it takes that experimentation to find out what will work. Yeah. So how do you approach that experimentation with HR initiatives, and how do you course correct when something isn't going as planned?
Well, I like to be honest from the start, in the sense that, I like to tell people we're implementing this. This is version 1, and we need you to tell us if something is missing, if there's things we could do better. We need you to tell us so that in the next cycle or for version 2, we've improved. So that for me is quite important. The collaborative approach is also very interesting, because what happens when you include the end users or different stakeholders from the beginning is that you share responsibility with the outcome, right? It's not just on you. As a consultant, it's on you, but it's, it's easier to blame the person coming from the outside, and it's okay. And as with anything in life, taking responsibility if something doesn't go as planned, I think will just have, tremendous impact compared to being like, oh, I put everything in place and it should have worked and it's not my problem. No, take responsibility, look at why it didn't work, try to get to the point as like, why is it that it didn't get the results that we wanted, or we didn't get to the, the finish line in time like we wanted, and communicate that. Communication is key. So just communicate why it didn't work. We all like to have a plan B, a plan C, and so on, but sometimes you're just not going to get the results that you want, again, because it's not a mathematic equation. We're dealing with humans, right? So yes. Taking responsibility, I think, is a big factor. Yeah.
Awesome. Question that I have is regarding the trust. Yes. Obviously, to roll out any new process or do any transformation, it's extremely important for us to have that trust from managers, from senior leaders and employees to make sure the projects are successful. So my question is, what are the steps that you take to build and maintain that trust with all of them throughout the process? And
I like to build a communication plan that is quite detailed and precise, and that is includes communications that are like often, and not just coming from me, whether I'm internal or external, but coming from what I call the sponsors. So an exec that is your sponsor for your project, and to show that you have the buy-in, and that, the top level of the organization believes in whatever it is that you're trying to do. That's a big point, trust. And again, from the start, having your end user telling you what they need and showing that you're listening to them and you're trying to facilitate their life is going to build the trust that you're looking to build. We have to, as people ops and as HR professional, get out of the mindset that we think, for example, what a performance management program or a training program should look like. Because the truth is, there's no one size fit all in HR. It does not exist. And that's my personal opinion. We can learn in school what HR is, but there is no one size fit all. And the real the real impact is with the end user. So if you want to build trust and you want them to use whatever it is that you're trying to put in place, ask them their opinion from the start and communicate with them through the phases of this project.
It's almost similar to a product and the customer. You
Exactly.
want to satisfy the customer.
It's easier for me because I'm a consultant. So they're literally my clients, right?
True.
So it's easier for me to detach myself because I'm not even within the organization. But even as a people ops professional and HR professional within an organization, they're still your clients. They're your internal clients. HR is a service. It is what it is. We are a service. So if you were to build a service or a product as an entrepreneur for someone, you would want to meet their needs. Not what you think is like such a cool product or such a cool service. If you want them to buy what it is that you're selling, it needs to meet their needs. It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing.
Absolutely. One other off the topic question, like it's actually topic itself, but would love to know as a consultant, sometimes you give advice, like our role HR is like advisors, and we're not decision makers for the teams, right? It stays with the managers, and managers are the one who directly impact the employee experience and they like the retention, productivity, and everything. So how do you manage this dynamics where like they expect you to give the results, but you're not in the position of decision making, you're in a position of advising, training, and providing resources?
It took me years to accept the fact that I'm an advisor and I'm not the decision maker, except when it comes to my team. If I'm an HR manager, obviously that's different, right? But it took me years to accept the fact that if I'm advise something or I make a recommendation, there's a possibility that the business, whether I'm internal or external, is not going to take my advice. And that's okay. It's much more frustrating when you're an employee. Let's be honest. It's much more frustrating because you're emotionally involved. It's frustrating. And I think as we all get those moments where like we advise or we make recommendations and they don't follow it. And then they come back to us 3 months later and they're like, ooh, you were right. That's a nice little moment, right? That's nice.
Yeah.
But you really have to kind of like let go. I think a lot of us too are, professionally accredited. I know that in Montreal and Quebec, I have my CHRP. My job is to make recommendations based on the law and so on and so on. And then the business decides. And detach yourself. I know it sounds really frustrating, but at the end of the day, if you've given the advice based on the law, based on what you believe is ethical, based on what you believe would have the best results, and they decide not to take your advice, it is still your job to help them after if it goes, it's a little bit like personal relationships when you think about it. You talk with your friends, you've advised them. Sometimes they don't listen to you. They come back to you, they're frustrated or they're sad. You're still going to help them. That's what we are, essentially, in my eyes.
So another question I have is, one of the key challenges HR faces is demonstrating its value to the business.
Yeah.
So how do you tie these HR initiatives, projects to business metrics like profitability or productivity? Can you share an example of a time that HR has actually directly contributed to revenue or cost saving?
There are metrics that are easier to show profitability or cost savings towards. Like if you think of recruitment, you can measure how much a recruitment process costs, or you can measure in terms of turnover, how much does it cost you to replace someone? So cost per hire, even the training, after you can measure these. So these, you can easily measure. In terms of revenue, I find it's harder because unless you're talking about your sales team, and so you have to recruit the best salespeople possible, or you're going to help your VP of sales or your chief revenue officer in terms of building the OKRs for your sales team, then you can have an direct impact on the revenue. But I think that apart from these categories, it feels as though it's harder to measure our impact on cost savings or on revenue, in my opinion.
As a wrap up, love to know your advice. What would you say as to HR leaders or consultants who are looking to improve their project management skills in people ops? And what are the key takeaways they should focus on to make their HR initiatives more impactful and results driven?
Well, project management is something you can learn. Okay. I don't have a PMP. I learned it by doing different courses online and just by doing, essentially, trial and error. But obviously, if you have a member of your team who has a PMP, by all means use them, because they're, it's a science. It is what it is. But as an HR team, there are courses out there. And if you're an HR leader, offering a small course for your employees so that they know project management 101, I think that's interesting. I think that's worth it, especially if you're a people ops team or an HR team, you're the leader of that team, and you want your team to start having an impact on the business. For the business to take you seriously, you kind of want to know what project management is and talk to them in terms of projects and initiatives. So I would invest in that. I'm assuming you have a training budget or so on, obviously. And if not, LinkedIn Learning has great courses that are Udemy or so on. It doesn't need to cost a fortune. But if everyone in your team kind of like takes the same kind of training, at least also you're speaking the same language, which is a big asset in terms of getting through those projects together, because you're speaking the same languages in terms of steps and so on.
Yeah.
Personally, though, I would say that a good knowledge in change management and in communicating change is even more important than knowing the steps of a project. This is key to having the impact that you're looking to have, because you can have the best steps in projects and the best deliverable sets and you've assigned everything to everyone, but if you're not communicating it properly and you're not managing change properly, your project's going to fail. So I would invest in that even more than learning project management. And also I would say, be sure to understand the culture. Talk to the employees to understand the subcultures as well, and the realities of different departments and day-to-days, what they're really going through. That's important. Like, go back to what we were saying at the beginning, multiply the sources of information. That's gonna help you get through those projects, by keeping in mind that we are people ops, we're HR. So our goal is actually to always, within any HR project, facilitate their life, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to facilitate their life. So yeah, I would say that. I don't know if it answered your questions, but I could keep talking forever.
Yes. That's such a great advice. I mean, to make it effective, what you said about change management, it is so true. For everyone, I'm gonna drop in a link for a change management episode that I have done in People Ops Playbook. And I'm gonna drop in HR audit tool, some courses that I found very helpful online. I think a mixture of having that technical knowledge about how to practically manage projects, at the same time watching this episode and to understand all the nuances about how to build those people projects, aligning with what employees need, what management needs, and what are those things HR need to do as a part of like compliance with legal issues and everything. So this would be a great resource. And lastly, I'm also gonna add engagement survey, great questions, links that will be useful for you. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was fun. I liked it.
Yeah.
I had fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll catch you all later.